For centuries, maritime hierarchy meant unquestioned authority. Today that changes. The Guide's Chapter 2 grants every crew member, from apprentice to captain, the power and responsibility to stop unsafe operations. But can an industry built on command structures truly embrace this cultural revolution? We explore how psychological safety becomes operational safety and why your newest deckhand might save your next operation. Considering your role here representing the P&I Club, how exactly will non-compliance with the new guidelines transform an operational incident into a costly breach of duty, specifically where an operator knowingly chooses a low assurance provider to save immediate cost?
I first want to reassure our members and ship owners and charters, we do consider the Guide as an operational document. It is there to assist the ship owners and ship operators, but it's not a document that affects cover. So given my role, you might think the documents that will affect cover is, for example, an LNG COU, condition of use agreement, that we encourage members to submit for review because we can check if this type of agreement with the terminal might affect your exposure and whether that liabilities would be covered under standard cover. The same, we might encourage you to provide bills of lading for review or charter parties because we will review it from cover perspective. When it comes to OCMF, Signature Guidance, we do appreciate the collaboration between different stakeholders to provide this type of guidance, but we do consider it as operational documents. We do not, and I work very closely with our safety and management team to review document, who are probably better placed than me to comment on it. We don't see any particular issue with the new guidance. We do think it's forward-thinking. It is prepared for the future because it does bring there's a dedicated section on the human factor, the human-centered design, which is very close to the heart of our club. We have quite a few projects ongoing with human-centered design. There is actually a specific international group, working group, looking at the human-centered design and how legislation should actually look closer on implementing that into more of the legislation that is currently out there. So we do welcome the introduction of that part in the guidance. It's still early days, so we haven't had feedback from our members, the ship owners, operators, charters, and STS operators, whether they are facing any issues when implementing the Guide, where are they at this stage, and we as a P&I Club, we're definitely there to support them. So if any questions will arise or there will be, then we are here to assist our members.
I mean, Carolina, as you and the others around this table know, Chapter 2 is probably the most transformative addition to the Guide. It mandates the formal adoption of stop work authority for every crew member, and it's specifically designed to dismantle dangerous hierarchical barriers and assess safety critical tasks. So my question for you and the others around the table is, in a claims scenario following an incident, how will you evaluate whether the culture of stop work authority was genuinely embedded, and so the provider, the operator, it could be an AET, has strong legal defensibility versus the culture being more procedural compliance written into the SMS?
I just wanted to emphasise going back into the first chapter before you got to Chapter 2, because comparing the first edition versus the second edition in Chapter 1.5, which I'm very pleased to see, is the word training and familiarisation of ship's personnel. And if you go through that, it actually gives you some indication of what the training should include, but not limited to, and then you list all of those various things, which I think is a very good marker. But if I can make one slight criticism, I'd like to have spread that out a little bit further. One for the floating facility, one for the LNG carrier, and also one for the marine service providers and pilots. So they're all sort of aligned, because you've got to get those three elements aligned and working together. So, and also the other interesting part is Chapter 1.6, which is an element on security, which is a very big thing now for us in the types of world we operate. But also it's nice to see, or pleasing to see, the cyber security as well, because that's also a big threat for us now, which we take with a pinch of salt at the moment. But having that in there, when we're doing our risk assessments, we can actually use the guidance go through the various chapters in the guidance and then implement that into our risk assessments and then base that against the credible scenarios that we're going to find in whatever location we're operating in the world. So in my view, it's nice to see that in the first opening chapters before you then go on to chapter 2, which leads you quite nicely into chapter 2, actually.
I mean, if I could just touch on the Stop Work Authority, definitely not to answer the question that you posed, but one of the challenges I think that you have, that you raised some part in that question, is it's not just the people who are on board that need to understand and respect within that scenario that everyone has a right to stop the work. They also need to feel safe and backed by people in the office. So how you judge that, and if essentially what you're talking about is, do the people feel safe within their environment and with their job security for whoever's employing them, that they are going to back them to do that as well. So it's not just on board, it's also within the boardroom, that's a company-wide policy that everyone is encouraged to do that. So how you then judge if everyone felt safe to do that is a very difficult task indeed.
Building that culture, it's not something that happens overnight. You can't build a safety culture overnight. That has to be embedded in the practice, in the culture of the entire company as you go along. And what we like to call it is generative safety culture. And how you do that is by, like Ruth was talking about, you have to build psychological safety first. And that's allowing them to engage authentically and feedback truthfully, reporting everything and being able to understand that they can report this stuff and they're not going to be taken to task for any of that stuff as well. And then just being honest and open about what's being discussed there. And then the next pillar of that is going to be conscious risk awareness. And how do you build that? It's by acting as a team and encouraging them to act as a team interdependently, not alone by themselves, but as a group together, and then also empowering them through capability, which is what I think Chapter 2 does in terms of human factors and building that set of base there, that now we have to take this culture even further along, and that's how you get people to role model as HSSC is the way to go, and doing the right thing right every time when nobody is watching. And I think that's one of the things that's been difficult in the maritime industry for so long, is that fear has been built in there in a lot of cultures too, in a lot of company cultures, that don't report this thing because we don't want somebody else to find out about this piece of it. But now if we take this and we add all of this in here, that's what it's asking us to do. It's like, let's open that up, let's build that psychological safety, let's allow the crews and the people to tell us what's actually wrong out there and what's going on, so that we can help fix it now. And that's the cultures that I think needs to be, and I think that's what Chapter 2 actually helps to do. And that's what I really like about Chapter 2.
I was in favor of Chapter 2 when I saw it, and I believe it worth mentioning that Dynamarine has put a lot of effort over the last 12 years to unite this industry, which is quite fragmented based on where the STS operation takes place, whether you have an oil major behind or whether you have a trader. So we see quite a fragmented industry, and what Dynamarine tried to do in order to increase in a cognitive place the understanding of learning from the industry. We have built a database with feedbacks from masters, and whether the feedback is positive or negative, we always inform the STS service providers, because it's important not to give the feedback only for the negative. The counterparty needs to know the positive feedbacks as well, and the masters needs to have this. They need to have this information, and you see how the master is empowered with enthusiasm and with, let's say, positive perception over the understanding of STS when he knows that he has successfully conducted 50, 60, 20 STS operations in various parts with various STS service providers, and this is reflected in a certificate, the crew STS certificate. So these are very simple things that we have taken initiatives over the industry. You all know about it, okay? And we see that this culture now, through Chapter 2, is being embedded in order to improve the understanding. And let's be honest, stop working authority, it's very positive, but it requires to have an excellent understanding. It requires to be very positive thinking. There should not be blame culture in the organization, and that starts from the very high level, and so we see a transformation there, and I think the role of Dynamarine has been very positive over the years.
And I think along those lines is, rather than stop work authority, if you think of it more as everybody has stop work responsibility. It's your responsibility now to take that safety to that next level and actually stop an action before it happens.
Yeah, but my hope is that the ship owners now, armed with this kind of framework, will look more closely at the culture on board their vessels and actually look at the culture on board. Does this particular captain, encourage this kind of, safety culture on board, or are they still following the sort of old-fashioned authoritarian regime where the crew are too afraid to actually exercise the stop work or responsibility?
And Mark, very well you're mentioning this, because this is what actually Chapter 2 does. In the last paragraphs, in the last sections, it reflects the introduction of drills. It's about learning drills and work exercises. And actually, that's what it's about. And you just gave me an idea, to develop a drill about stop working authority.
Mark and I were both Mark's mooring master now. I was a mooring master before, and I can't even count on two hands the number of times I've been told by ship captains, like, don't report this, don't report this, don't report this, or I'll get in trouble from my company. And I'm like, I have to report it. My company, this is a responsibility that I have. And it's
do you see any change in the mindset over the last years? Is this being changed?
So my personal experience is that from a broader perspective, the culture has improved massively. From the authorities, the ship owners, the officers.
Why?
But
yes.
I'm still seeing the problems locally on board specific vessels. And that's a much tougher obstacle to overcome, in my opinion, because
is it a matter of culture? How would this improve?
I mean, you're talking about changing mindsets. You're talking about cultures of people who grow up. They're raised not to question authority. They're raised not to raise any questions or point things out because they expect to get into trouble for that. That's a much tougher problem to overcome, I believe. I think the generic culture has improved massively, but a ship is very isolated overall. I mean, with all the communication we have today, it's improved, but still, once you're on that vessel, you're under the captain's command, and it's very difficult to overcome that culture.
Yeah. I think one way to overcome that is by modeling good behaviors, and highlighting those. And when someone does exercise, if someone does speak up and raise a question or raise a concern, is to highlight that. And I recognize it can be difficult if someone in a higher position of authority doesn't encourage that, and they try to cut that off, so it's difficult to do. But the point that Ruth made, I thought was fantastic, around not stop work authority, or I've heard different names. Stop work obligation is one of the ones I prefer from the upstream sector. The stop work obligation. The use of that stop work obligation doesn't exist just on board the vessels. It's, I think, incredibly powerful when you see that stop work authority, obligation, responsibility exercised by someone ashore. Instead of pushing the decision down to the master, because at all times, the overriding authority of the master is the overriding authority of the master. But if someone ashore, has a concern, they should also, as I argue, they have an obligation as well, just like on board, they have an obligation to stop work. If they have a concern, they shouldn't defer that decision to the master and ask the master to take a decision that could easily be taken ashore to stop an unsafe operation.
There's one point I want to clarify with the two captains, if I may, and you, Darren. We call them pilots, but you guys refer to them as mooring master. What is the right terminology? Is it mooring
It
master or
depends on
pilot?
it depends on location.
Yeah.
It depends on when I say location, and now it's more POAC is the term you see. A POAC or STS superintendent for a non-Annex 1 cargo. POAC is more reserved for, if you would, Annex 1 cargoes. But the STS superintendent, it could be a pilot.
Yeah.
It could be serving as the STS superintendent. It's discussed in the guide. Who that person may be, the qualifications that might be required, and experience for someone to be the STS superintendent. It could be, depending on the scenario, again, the location, the vessels involved, it could be one of the two masters of the vessels involved. You may not have a third party serving as the STS superintendent or the pilot or the POAC.
I think one of the things that you need to, prior to every operation, we have a toolbox talk, and in that toolbox talk, and when I look at the guidance, there's a lot of stuff there you can transfer into that toolbox talk that's covered. But the critical factor is you do the operation, and then it's the debrief. Because in that debrief, we learn lots of things. And then it's, once you have that information within the debrief, how do you then transfer it into the joint plan of operation because of the lessons that you've learned? Now, what we've done to address this is that when we started all of this into FLNG, when it all started, we would get the tug masters, the FLNG operations person of overall authority and control, and even the LNG captains to attend the simulation training. So then you start to build up a relationship with people, because the way that you communicate is through relationship. If I don't know you, it's going to be very difficult for us to have a conversation, an open conversation. We don't know each other. So we found that if you actually get that relationship building at the very early stages, when we get to that point when we have our debrief, okay, what lessons did we learn? The tug masters, the person of overall responsibility, the people on the LNG carrier can actually physically put their hands up and say, hey, well, this is what we learned. And this also goes down to the crew on the LNG carrier, in this case LNG, the mooring gangs and such and what have you. What worked? How do we get the line across? Did that work? Did that not work? So we then can actually take that information and then transfer it. If it's a valid lesson learned, we can then transfer that into the joint plan of operation, and then it becomes an operational procedure for us. But you've got to build that relationship in there straight away, because it's very difficult when you're all new. The other problem, of course, we have is that rotation of crews. And so you've got to go all the way through the system. And we implement this every time we employ someone in our organisation, that's the first thing we do, is say, if you see something wrong, stop it. Don't be frightened of the consequences, just stop it.
Yes, but provided that you know your business.
But that's why
Otherwise everybody will go, stop it.
But that's why you employ competent seafarers and you challenge their competence.
Or you ensure to train them.
Yeah, and you train them.